BayRadio International on a Tuesday, and I'm pleased to welcome our US correspondent, Reynolds, to the studio. He is via webcam today. I'm not sure if that's because his boss has cut his funding, because that seems to be happening a lot, or why he's looking like Roy Orbison today. Why is that, sir?
Those people who are not watching this live, and that would mean nobody, but we do record all of our shows, and everybody's going to see this in a week later, will notice that I'm wearing sunglasses indoors, which I used to think was cool.
You do a good Roy Orbison.
It worked for Roy Orbison, but on me, it looks so uncool. It's scary, but I'm wearing them because I had a little bit of eye surgery about a week ago, and my eyes are still a little sensitive to light, and I can't drive and that sort of thing. So just this 1 week, we're doing it remotely, and I'm protecting my eyes. So, but I do look ridiculous. And
we're glad to see that everything went okay.
Yeah.
What a week.
What a week. Oh, yeah. What a week for me to take off.
We've got to stop saying what a week, because every week is what a week, isn't it?
Oh,
really?
I know. It's just crazy. Ever since the election, every week has been worse and worse. But this one, I think, will go down as one of our weirder weeks, especially after that catastrophe in the Oval Office on Friday with Zelensky. I think that's the thing everybody's talking about, and I don't think that we need to rehash a whole lot of what happened. Everybody seems to know all about that. Although I did talk to a friend of mine online who said, who does not live in the U.S., who said, "Yeah, I hadn't heard anything about it. I don't know anything about this." So I thought, oh boy,
there will be people on
there will be people
who hadn't, or up until, maybe Saturday morning.
Yeah.
Just incredible scenes, an incredible situation. We'll have to pick up where we are today, I think, and obviously that meeting will come up as we go through what's been happening. The overnight sensation is that President Trump has now paused U.S. aid to Ukraine after that Oval Office blow-up, pressuring Zelensky to get into Russian talks. We've heard nothing else, but we perhaps weren't expecting basically stopping U.S. military aid.
Well, if he stops any aid right now, or halts it, or puts a pause on it, whatever he wants to call it, that's going to be at least a few months where they have no bullets, they have no guns, they have no rockets, and that sort of thing. So hopefully this pause, I mean, this is coming from me. I believe that the pause is going to be very, very temporary.
Yeah,
because
of course it will. Yes, we hope it'll be temporary, and it won't take effect on the battlefield until 3 to 4 months' time. However,
right.
If you're in that situation where you don't know if anything is coming in the next 3 to 4 months, as we've seen in the past, where there's been, a slowdown in receiving that weaponry and most importantly that ammunition, then the job on the battlefield would be to ration what you're using, to be able to make sure that you're still okay. So,
a lot of it seems to be because of a stupid reason, which is that Trump seems to be waiting for some sort of an apology. He wants an apology from Zelensky about not being deferential enough to him, for telling him what the U.S. should do. And Trump really, for those people who did not see this or not see the whole thing, which is about 7 or 8 minutes long, I mean, he really got his back up about this, and he got J.D. Vance all worked up about it. J.D. asking for, he said, I can't believe you guys have never thanked us. Well, it turns out they've thanked him no less than 31 times.
And that was in English.
In English, yes.
More times in other languages.
Well, and they were also picking on the way he dressed. You have some nerve coming into the Oval Office not wearing a suit. And I go, well, the guy, first of all, that's his MO, that's his look, that's his brand. Number two, he's in the middle of fighting a war. So
and that is exactly it. He made a conscious decision to always keep that uppermost in people's minds by dressing in the way that he does, and also supporting his countrymen and women that are fighting whilst he's around the world trying to do the heavy diplomacy and bring an end to the fighting ultimately, but also whilst it's unable to be able to do that by getting support for the efforts.
I know there are going to be a lot of people listening to this who support Trump, and they're either Trumpers or they lean that way. But you have to admit the whole thing was very insulting toward the Ukrainians. It was very insulting toward their president. And I think that cooler heads need to prevail in this whole thing. Obviously, Zelensky wants to get something done. He wants peace. To say that Zelensky does not want peace because of the way he acted in the Oval Office is disingenuous, and it's ridiculous, because this country is losing thousands of people, of their countrymen, and he would like to have this stop, and I know the Russians would like to have this stop, but at what price, right?
Well, if you have done deals in the past and the people on the other side of that deal haven't followed through and have continuously broken that deal, then of course you're going to be asking for some kind of security guarantees, which is where he was trying to go when it all started to fall away. And I don't think there's anything wrong in asking for that, and I don't think anybody else believes it. The thing that seems to have tipped Trump over the edge now is what he said yesterday. Zelensky, when asked, he said that the end of Russia's war against Ukraine is still very, very far away. Well, in real terms, nobody else can think any different as things stand. But of course, there is the pressure about the deal on the precious minerals, isn't there?
Yeah, and at the base of this whole thing, I mean, Trump is a real estate guy. He believes in the quid pro quo. He believes that I'm not going to give you anything, and you're not going to turn around and give me nothing, and that's a good deal for both of us. What he wants is he wants Ukraine to not only apologize, which ultimately I bet Zelensky does, because the stakes are much too high, but ultimately he wants the mineral rights to all of the lithium that powers batteries that Ukraine seems to have a lot of, and the United States has virtually none of. So there is common need there on both sides, but he really wants something for all of the billions of dollars that are leaving the U.S. and going to Ukraine, and has gone to Ukraine in the past. And there are a lot of Americans I know who are kind of backing that up. Where
it comes from at the moment?
Do I know where it comes from at the moment?
America at the moment gets the majority of those precious minerals from China.
You know what? Is it China? I did not know that. I think I read that somewhere, but I wasn't quite sure.
Why President Trump is looking for other alternatives. And of course, Russia has great stockpiles also, and there are great stockpiles, as one of our listeners was pointing out as well, along that disputed area that where the incursion has happened in Ukraine by Russia. It does give you another side to perhaps what may be going on in this situation.
One of the big questions that's being asked around the UK right now, not around the UK, but around the EU, is can Europe secure peace in Ukraine without the US? And I know that Britain and France are taking the lead on this sort of thing, but the big question that I would ask you and ask everybody who's listening to this is, is this possible at all? That not just with these two countries, but with all the countries in the EU, can enough forces be marshaled, enough money be marshaled to kind of pick up the slack, so to speak, of the U.S. if they tend to back out?
Well, this is one of the other issues that Trump was taking issue with about the declaration, which, I thought would have been the normal thing to say after that meeting in London, where people were saying, well, without the US, it's a very, very difficult task. We need the US to manage this situation, to help us deal with it. But President Trump seems to think we were giving something away there to the Russians by saying
and that's
let's face it, who's been giving stuff away to the Russians recently?
Yeah, and that's the thing that bothers a lot of Americans, not just people who are anti-Trump or people who are Democrats. It's people who are on the Republican side are saying, now, wait a minute, if you really, you don't even have to dig deeply into this conversation to see that Trump is siding with Putin. He's siding with Russians and giving stuff away, basically saying, look, you can't win this war, so let's give Putin exactly what he wants and everybody's going to be happy. The whole idea of keeping Putin happy is something that doesn't make a lot of Americans happy. It certainly has been fodder for every political cartoonist in the country who is absolutely taking Trump to task over this thing about how much he loves Putin. He loves the fact that he's an authoritarian and that he's got control over the media. He's got control over everything that happens in the country. And Trump really admires that, and he wishes he had that. As a matter of fact, he had a mock-up of a Time magazine cover made up this week that said, "Long live the king." He views himself as a king.
He wrote that, didn't he, when he was talking about combustion charges, what was it,
yep.
what they call them, charges in New York City, where he felt that he'd won the battle and said, "Long live the king."
Yeah, and he continues to say, well, I won in a landslide. You didn't win. You won by 1.5 points. So let's be really clear about that. It's one thing to win. It's another thing to get to be able to tell people that you won in a landslide. But he is not a king. We think we resolved that situation 250 years ago, but apparently it's rearing its ugly head. And I think
remember what happened then, shouldn't he? Really?
He should. And the thing that most Americans, I won't say I can't speak for most Americans, that many Americans that I'm reading and communicating with are concerned with is the whole idea of what happened in Germany in 1933. You know, it was canceling of rights, and I can pretty much do what I want, and I don't care about the law. And him being able to steamroll stuff through, that's the troubling issue. Add the Putin and the Russia thing on top of that, and it's just a volcano right now.
Yeah, we'll come back and talk a bit more about this after the break. A number of other things on this particular situation. It's such many different factors. Incidentally, if you do want to fact check it, it's easy. It's everywhere. 33 times Zelensky thanked Americans and US leaders. Google that. You'll find all of those thanks. And he has been thanking since that meeting as well. These are the words of President Zelensky. For peace to be real, we need real security guarantees. And this is the position of all Europe, the entire continent, Zelensky said on a social media post yesterday, 3 days after President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance accused him of being disrespectful and failing to offer thanks during a contentious Oval Office meeting that we've been talking about with the cameras rolling. Of course, we understand the importance of America, and we are grateful for all the support we've received from the United States, Zelensky reiterated. There's not been a day when we haven't felt gratitude. It's gratitude for the preservation of our independence. Our resilience in Ukraine is based on what our partners are doing for us and for their own security. What we need is peace, not endless war, and that's why we say security guarantees are key to this. It seems, Rich, that the issue may well be at times that there is perhaps a rush to try and get a deal on the table, something in the bag to prove and show that is happening, and that's been pushed about or made to happen by President Trump.
You know, another thing that I was thinking about too, when we were here in the break, is that Zelensky seems to be doing everything by himself. You know, he's the chief cook, bottle washer. He's the astronaut. He's the fireman. He's the guy who delivers the mail at the same time. And I don't think that's possible for any one person to do that. Clearly, there's something about him and what he's trying to accomplish that everybody else can see, but the Russians are pushing back so much so. This guy, Lavrov, who is Putin's number one guy, he keeps fanning the flames by saying it's clear that Zelensky doesn't know what he's doing. It's clear that he was standing in the way of peace. And anybody from the outside, you or me or anybody else, can see the fact that that is not the case. I think that what has to happen here is that a cooler head needs to prevail, whether it's Starmer, whether it's Macron, or somebody even from a smaller country needs to step in and kind of bring the two parties together. Of course, Russia's plan plan is to make sure that they get all the land that they possibly can. And you and I both know that that ain't going to happen, that the Ukrainian people will fight with every last breath in their bodies to keep their land, as they should. So where this is going to end, I don't know. But clearly, in my mind, Zelensky can't get this done by himself. And Trump is a very incendiary force, and as everybody knows. And so what I think is that what's going to happen here is another country is going to get involved and put this whole thing together.
Well,
It's got to.
It's getting involved in parts of the peace process,
right?
In not just with the Russians, but also in the Middle East. But
that's right.
Gordon's asked the question: what's that history between Trump and Zelensky? What happened previously as to why they've never really been on good terms?
I think the problem is personal, in that Zelensky was very good friends with Biden. That's what I think, because everything with Trump is a personal relationship. You're either for him or against him. And if you were a friend of Biden's, and everybody knew that Zelensky and Biden had a special bond, that Joe Biden had no problem giving billions and billions of dollars to Ukraine without any sort of battle plan being laid out. Now, I'm sure they had spoken and laid out what the battle plan is that you or I don't know. But at the end of the day, the two of them were friends. And so I think that's the reason why Trump has a huge problem with it.
And where does Hunter Biden fit into all of this?
You know what? I think there's a way to drag him into any possible discussion. I think that Hunter Biden is nothing more than a pawn in this whole thing. Hunter Biden is, as we know, was convicted and then pardoned. But at the end of the day, Hunter Biden is a middle-aged man who is a recovering drug addict and alcoholic and had some problems. And Trump made a big deal out of this thing.
And how did this result in Trump's impeachment?
Well, it didn't. Well, well, ultimately it did, but he did not. He was not tossed out of office. But I just think that all that goes, anything with the name Biden into it is attached, and I think you can't ask. Trump is like a child. You can't tell him to get over it. You can't tell him, this has one thing does not have anything to do with the other. He connects everything being for me or against me, and he sees Zelensky as against him. He sees Biden as against him, and on the other side, Putin has whispered some very lovely things in his ear. What it is, I don't know. There are many Americans who believe that something happened in the 2016 election, which means that with Russian aid, in that the Russians now, Trump now owes the Russians, meaning Putin, a favor.
That may be something that people believe. I've not seen any concrete evidence
right.
on that.
Neither have I. But there are a lot of people who kind of believe that, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist at all. And I don't know if there's any truth. I don't know if there's any truth to that at all.
I'd rather stick to the facts.
Yeah.
After that meeting in the United States on Saturday, pro-Ukrainian protests erupted across the U.S., calling the Trump and Vance display an ambush on Zelensky.
I believe it was an ambush too. I think that's an apt word to use. That he was kind of set up, especially when you look at the room and notice that the vice president was there, and clearly he and Trump were singing from the same hymnal. And we know that for any of us who have had supervisors or bosses in our respective businesses who have been like this, that they want everybody to speak the same language and be in lockstep. We know that Marco Rubio said nothing in that meeting, but we know that if he probably had said something, he would have been reprimanded in some way. And that the same thing goes for all the other people in the room. But I do believe it was an ambush. It was on, so to use sports terminology, it was on home turf. And so you can kind of look at it that way. What's going on in the U.S. right now, there are small fires being put out around the country in that in the protest I know you're talking about happened up in the state of Vermont. There were a lot of people who went into a town hall meeting, and there were signs saying Vermont stands with Ukraine, that Trump is an international embarrassment, and people waved Ukrainian flags in solidarity. And a lot of that video has been seen. At the end of the day, Vermont is a relatively small state.
But the governor is a Republican, but he refused to vote
for
Trump in any of his 3 runs for the White House.
But he also wanted and he also made a point of being very, very kind and being very, very reverential to the vice president, who was up skiing that weekend. But Vance was making all kinds of accusations against Zelensky and how much he needed to show more gratitude, when Vance himself has never been to Ukraine. And so
he's back in the news in Britain again today as well.
Is that right? I kind of missed that. Tell me.
Following he's provoked fury, basically, in Britain by referring to a potential British and peacekeeping forces, 20,000 troops from some random country that hasn't fought a war in 30 or 40 years. I mean, his history is somewhat lacking, seriously, because, when Article 5 was invoked by the US after 9/11, they were there with the US. The only time, actually, that Article 5 has ever been invoked. But Britain and France and thousands of others were there to support the US in that particular situation. And we all know the aftermath of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And so there's been a little bit of a pushback today on his comments there. In fact, former Tory Veterans Minister, a former serviceman himself, Johnny Mercer, called him a clown and said,
I would agree with that.
He needs to wind his neck in. And I'm glad that somebody's come out and said it in the last few days. Deeply disrespectful, though, his comments is what is being said in Britain today. And, he had a few.
But it's a completely ridiculous and false statement for him to say.
To say recently, he called Britain an Islamist country with nukes. He said we were backsliding on free speech. In fact, he brought it up again. He said that when he was over, but in Europe. But he said it again when Sir Keir Starmer was in the Oval Office, who did actually stick up for himself and say that we've had free speech for a very long time. It'll last a long time, and we're proud of that. So I'm not sure what his agenda is. Oh, actually, maybe I do. But at least, some headlines are coming back, and these people are not being allowed to get away with just what they want to say, to how they want to say it, and about who they want to say it. It was all well and good having the floor, but you need to have the feedback from what people think about what you say also.
Well, clearly he's in over his head speaking to the British press, because they know the truth, and he apparently doesn't. He doesn't know anything about history. He doesn't know that the UK and Britain in particular has stood with the United States in the past dozen or so, what I would call even every harebrained thing that we've gotten into, things like going into Afghanistan and at least 11 other events where the UK has stood with the US, sent in troops, and there's a lot of British blood that has been left on the ground, and he needs to remember that, and most Americans I know would remember that, and if not, they need to be reminded that that country is and has been for 100 years, has been our best ally. They have been our best friend. They have supported the U.S. The U.S. has supported them, and that cannot be lost, and that cannot be taken lightly.
Let's switch to today.
Okay.
And Putin's spokesman says Trump's foreign policy largely coincides with Russia's vision.
Oh, there's no question about that. There's absolutely no question that the Russians are just delighted at the way things are going right now, from everything I'm reading, and things like, well, President Trump is right, and they're right for taking care of this, and the Ukraine is being an outlier in this whole affair. Those kind of statements are, I wouldn't say disingenuous, but they certainly are statements that don't ring true.
All right. So what about Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth? He's ordered a halt to offensive cyber operations against Russia. Russia, of course, has intensified its cyber operations against Ukraine and NATO countries. So this is another way that the US isn't really interested in supporting the Europe and NATO countries anymore.
Well, this is, if you need any more, I mean, you as in the royal you, as anybody needs any more proof that Russia is in Trump's back pocket, is this recent order that the U.S. is to deprioritize Russian cyber threats. You're absolutely right. The Russians have stepped up the amount of spying they're doing. They've stepped up the amount of malware they're introducing, and it's very well known that any country can close down the electrical grid, the communications grid in any other country very, very easily. And the fact is that basically Hegseth, as Secretary of the Defense, has been told to back off and to stop basically persecuting Russia and trying to get them to pay a little bit less attention to sort of monkey shines that they're pulling off. And you're not going to hear the word monkey shines a lot in radio. No, you're not.
Yeah. So I think you meant it the other way round, actually, that Trump is in Russia's back pocket. Right?
That's right. I had the pockets all reversed on that one.
Right.
You're
Okay.
absolutely right.
We know you've got your double denim on today with the front and the back, haven't you?
Well, Hegseth, what Hegseth is doing really does fly in the face of the assessment of what other Western governments are doing. All the Western governments in the EU are saying that we need to be afraid of Russia and also China and, other states like Iran and North Korea. But to say that we're going to back off Russia now, that they get special status, is a complete lack of understanding.
North Korean troops on the ground in the Ukraine. Plane loads of Iranian drones and being sent to Ukraine. And what is going on with the situation then that the US are now great partners with Russia as well? Where is the United States' place in the world in March 2025? Because from where I'm looking, it looks completely the opposite as to where it was about a month ago.
I know, and the nice thing living over here is that we get more of a universal view than the people who are very, very close to it, who are living in the States. We can see that this is happening. We can see the trouble it's causing for countries in the EU and elsewhere in Europe and around the world, that this partnership, this love that Trump has for Putin and how he's building ties with Moscow ever since he took over in January. And even keep in mind what's going in the United Nations, and that twice he's voted with Russia in certain votes. And this guy,
councils, yeah.
Exactly. And this guy Peskov is saying that there's a long way to go on this thing, but God bless President Trump and President Putin, because if they can maintain this healthy relationship, the world is going to be a safer place.
Well, as you said,
says you, buddy.
More than the Ukrainians want.
That's right. Good way to put it.
Nobody more than the Ukrainians wish for just and lasting peace. Stock markets around the world have been falling following the introduction of tariffs by President Donald Trump on goods entering the US from China, Canada and Mexico. Trump's imposed 25% tariffs on imports from Canada and Mexico and 20% tariffs against China. Canada and China announced their own import taxes on US goods, while Mexico said it had contingency plans, sparking fears of a full-blown trade war. The three major stock market indexes in the US sank following the news, while the FTSE 100 index of the UK's biggest publicly listed companies opened lower today. Stock markets in Asia also down. I know that big Rich Reynolds keeps an eye on his investments in the money markets around the world. So not a good day for you, sir.
I do not have a lot of money in the market, but what money I do have, I lost today. And the market went down the Dow is the main the thing that I watch. The Dow and the Nasdaq on the American exchange is we lost a lot yesterday, but the market at the open was down 300 and is down 800 now. So those of you that have your money on the U.S. stock exchange, we are losing a lot of money today because of all these tariffs, and a lot of it. Cal, I think a lot of this comes down to the fact that he has been a little unclear about how long these tariffs are going to last. It's the 10%, the 20, the 25%, which is what he's billing essentially Canada and Mexico. These are kind of arbitrary figures because he likes the sound of them, as I understand. To him, they're nice round numbers. But I was watching interviews with a couple of CEOs, one from a major company in a major retailer in the U.S. called Target, and he was saying these shipments, as soon as they get off the ship, as of today, are being slapped with a 25% tariff. And so he says, we have no choice but to pass that on to you. He goes, and the problem is Trump is setting himself as the arbiter to say, oh, I understand economics better than you do because I went to Wharton and I have a business background on the whole thing. But anybody else who has any kind of an economic background will tell you that tariffs are passed on as taxes by the consumer, and that's the way it's going to be. Now, another thing to consider is that how long is this going to go before people start feeling the pinch? Because he understands the stock market. He understands what people will be saying if the market continues to fail. And not only he is losing a lot of money, but a lot of his very famous rich people, one of them whose name is Musk, is going to be losing an awful lot of money. And at that point, they're going to be looking at the tariffs to say, maybe we can come up with a little better way. Of course, the whole time, Trump is never going to admit defeat. He's never going to admit, in my mind, that he did anything wrong.
Well, time will tell, and we've got plenty more hours to talk about it in the weeks to come, Rich. Good to see that you're on the road to recovery. Look forward to seeing you back in the studio at any time soon. I reckon you should keep the Roy Orbison look. It really suits.
No. I'm back in Death Star next week and without the glasses.
Something that has been passed around, you sent to me this morning, a number of other people have sent it to me. It mentions some of the things that people have been talking about. There have been a couple of agreements, of course, with Ukraine by a number of different countries. None of them seem to have been helping them very much in recent days. And I'll say thanks, Rich, and I'll go to our piece, and we'll talk again next week, okay?
Okay. See you next week.
This is something that you may not have seen or heard so far. Lech Walesa, a Polish statesman, dissident and Nobel Peace Prize laureate who served as the president of Poland between 1990 and 1995. After winning the 1990 election, Walesa became the first democratically elected president of Poland since 1926 and the first ever Polish president elected by popular vote. A shipyard electrician by trade, Walesa became the leader of the Solidarity movement and led a successful pro-democratic effort which in 1989 ended communist rule in Poland and ushered in the end of the Cold War. This is his letter.
Your Excellency, Mr. President, we watch the report of your conversation with the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, with fear and distaste. We find it insulting that you expect Ukraine to show respect and gratitude for the material assistance provided by the United States in its fight against Russia. Gratitude is owed to the heroic Ukrainian soldiers who shed their blood in defense of the values of the free world. They have been dying on the front lines for more than 11 years in the name of these values and in the independence of their homeland, which was attacked by Putin's Russia. We do not understand how the leader of a country that symbolizes the free world cannot recognize this. Our alarm was also heightened by the atmosphere in the Oval Office during this conversation, which reminded us of the interrogations we endured at the hands of the security services and the debates in communist courts. Prosecutors and judges acting on behalf of the all-powerful communist political police would explain to us that they held all the power while we held none. They demanded that we cease our activities, arguing that thousands of innocent people suffered because of us. They stripped us of our freedoms and civil rights because we refused to cooperate with the government or express gratitude for our oppression. We are shocked that President Volodymyr Zelensky was treated in the same manner. The history of the 20th century shows that whenever the United States sought to distance itself from democratic values and its European allies, it ultimately became a threat to itself. President Woodrow Wilson understood this when he decided in 1917 that the United States must join World War I. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt understood this when, after the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, he resolved that the war to defend America must be fought not only in the Pacific but also in Europe, in alliance with the nations under attack by the Third Reich. We remember that without President Ronald Reagan and America's financial commitment, the collapse of the Soviet Empire would not have been possible. President Reagan recognized that millions of enslaved people suffered in Soviet Russia and the countries it had subjugated, including thousands of political prisoners who paid for their defense of democratic values with their freedom. His greatness lay, among other things, in his unwavering decision to call the USSR an empire of evil and to fight it decisively. We won, and today the statue of President Ronald Reagan stands in Warsaw, facing the US Embassy. Mr. President, material aid, military and financial, can never be equated with the blood shed in the name of Ukraine's independence and the freedom of Europe and the entire free world. Human life is priceless. Its value cannot be measured in money. Gratitude is due to those who sacrifice their blood and their freedom. This is self-evident to us, the people of Solidarity, former political prisoners of the communist regime under Soviet Russia. We call on the United States to uphold the guarantees made alongside Great Britain in the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, which established a direct obligation to defend Ukraine's territorial integrity in exchange for its relinquishment of nuclear weapons. These guarantees are unconditional. There is no mention of treating such assistance as an economic transaction. Signed, Lech Walesa, former political prisoner, President of Poland.